Think about the last time you watched two people disagree, and one of them raised their voice, pushed harder, tried to dominate the exchange, while the other stayed completely level, and somehow still ended up being the one everyone trusted more by the end of it. Not because they won the argument loudly, because they never needed to. If you've noticed that pattern before, you've already sensed something most people never articulate clearly. Aggression and respect are not the same currency, even though they're constantly confused for one another. And the moment you understand why, you start seeing every confrontation, every negotiation, every tense conversation completely differently. Here's what most people never realize. Aggression doesn't actually earn respect. It earns compliance temporarily, usually out of a desire to avoid conflict rather than genuine deference. People go along with an aggressive person in the moment, but what they're feeling underneath isn't admiration. It's threat response. And threat response has a short shelf life. The instant the pressure lifts, so does the compliance, often replaced by quiet resentment instead of respect. This connects to something called dominance hierarchy, one of the oldest social systems humans operate within, even in modern civilized settings. For most of human history, dominance was established through visible force, volume, size, intensity. But in complex social environments, that old system runs into a problem. Aggression signals a need to control the outcome, and needing to control something is, paradoxically, a signal of insecurity, not strength. People sense this instinctively, even if they can't explain why an aggressive person leaves them feeling less impressed rather than more. And it gets even more interesting than that, because there's a psychological cost aggression creates in the room that most people underestimate. It activates something close to emotional contagion, but in a defensive direction. When someone becomes aggressive, the people around them don't feel inspired to align with that energy. They feel their own nervous systems brace, protect, withdraw. Respect requires a kind of openness in the observer, a willingness to be influenced. Aggression closes that openness almost immediately, replacing it with self-protection, which means the harder someone pushes for respect through force, the less available anyone actually is to give it. This is where almost everyone gets the equation backwards. They assume that if calm, patient behavior isn't working, the next logical step is more intensity. But greater intensity doesn't unlock respect. It usually unlocks distance. The people who are genuinely respected, in rooms, in relationships, in negotiations, tend to operate from an entirely different mechanism, one built on steadiness rather than pressure. There are three specific behaviors underneath this, almost never taught directly. The first is holding a position without needing to escalate it. Most people believe that if their first calm statement doesn't land, the answer is to say it louder, or more forcefully, the second time. But repetition with rising intensity signals exactly the opposite of what's intended. It signals that the position is shakier than it first appeared, that it needs force to hold up. People who gain real respect tend to do something almost counterintuitive. They repeat themselves at the same volume, the same tone, the second and third time, letting the consistency itself communicate the strength, rather than the intensity. The second is responding to pressure with questions instead of matching force. When someone becomes aggressive or pushy, the instinct is often to meet that energy head-on, to prove you won't be pushed around. But matching aggression with aggression usually just escalates the interaction into a contest neither side actually. This taps into psychological reactance. Instead of pushing back symmetrically, asking a calm, direct question, "Why does this need to happen right now?" disrupts the momentum of the pressure without feeding it. It forces the other person to justify the intensity rather than simply absorb it. The third, and the one people find hardest, is being willing to let silence sit, uncorrected, without rushing to fill it. Aggression often thrives on urgency, the sense that a gap in conversation needs to be immediately claimed. People who are respected without needing aggression have usually made peace with silence, even tense silence, understanding that rushing to fill it out of discomfort often communicates more anxiety than the words themselves would. This taps into false confidence versus real security. False confidence needs constant activity, constant assertion to feel solid. Real confidence can simply exist in a quiet moment without needing to prove anything else. There's a deeper reason this approach works so consistently, and it connects to scarcity. When someone is calm most of the time, their occasional firmness carries enormous weight precisely because it's rare. But someone who is intense by default has nothing left in reserve. Their aggression stops registering as significant because it's simply their baseline. Calm, used consistently and abandoned only when it truly matters, becomes one of the most underrated forms of leverage available in any relationship or negotiation. None of this means becoming passive, or avoiding conflict entirely, or letting boundaries go unspoken to keep the peace. Respect without aggression isn't about softness. It's about strength that doesn't need volume to be believed. The steadiness itself becomes the statement, and in most rooms, in most relationships, that steadiness ends up carrying far more weight than anything said with force ever could. The people who walk away from difficult conversations with more respect than they entered with were rarely the loudest voice in the room. They were usually the ones who never needed to raise their voice in the first place, because their position never depended on how much noise it made to be true. True power is rarely about controlling other people. It's about controlling yourself. If you want to keep exploring the psychology behind respect, confidence, and self-control, consider subscribing. There's a lot more beneath the surface of what actually earns influence than most people ever take the time to notice.